Exploring the Analects, Episode 1, Passage 2.12. Don't be a tool. Hey folks, this is Elliott Bernstein. Thanks for joining me on this very first episode of Exploring the Analects. Today we'll be talking about Passage 2.12 of the Analects, a four-character phrase, not counting the near-ubiquitous 子曰, in which Confucius explains how to put your capabilities to good use in life. Since this is the first episode, I'll also do a bit of meta-commentary and explain the series overall. I'll be working through the hundreds of passages in the Analects, a collection of quotes attributed to Confucius and compiled by followers of the Confucian Way in China between the 5th and 3rd centuries BCE. These passages touch on a whole range of topics that can still teach us how to live our lives today. They range in length from just a few syllables to several paragraphs of text, and since we're just getting started, and frankly, to give myself a bit of runway, we're going to start with some of the shortest, work through to the longer passages, and have the possibility of jumping around once things are on a roll. Here's a bit about the format of the show. I'll start off with an introduction to the quote, give my take on it, read the Chinese, and give a more formal translation. Next, we'll talk about the philosophy, history, and culture behind the quote. After that, I'll give linguistic notes, hopefully something of use to language learners at any level. And finally, I'll wrap up with comments on the passage's place in the Analects and mention any varying interpretations that might not have made it in elsewhere. Well, now that that's covered, let's jump in and take a look at the quote. I'll start off with my own little spin on passage 2.12. Don't take it too seriously, but hopefully the modern phrasing and subject matter give you something to hang your hat on as we dive deeper into the subject. And here it is. Want to be a good dude? Don't be a tool. Yep, that's it. Don't be a tool. And don't be surprised. Contrary to popular belief, the vast majority of the sayings attributed to Confucius in the Analects aren't packed full of esoteric and abstract philosophical concepts. They're actually focused on everyday life and personal relationships. It's kind of a handbook about how to be a good dude. Next up, I'll read the quote in my hopefully intelligible modern Mandarin. Then we'll follow up with a more faithful translation into English by Professor Pei-Min Ni from his excellent book, Understanding the Analects of Confucius. 子曰,君子不器. The master said, exemplary persons do not live like a mere vessel. So there you have it. Don't be a tool. In other words, a tool or a ritual vessel has a single purpose. It's good for that one thing, and if you try to use it for anything else, you might cause trouble. This is Confucius's way of saying that if you're an expert in one thing at the expense of everything else, you might just have trouble yourself. I agree, and I'll elaborate on that point a bit. The fact is that we all have some specialized skill, and nobody is perfectly balanced in the modern world. Wherever our capabilities lie, that's where others are most likely to want to put us to use. But a tool can be used for right or for wrong. So if you want to be a good dude or an exemplary person, it's your responsibility to put yourself to use at the right times, not just any time. Now that we're done introducing the passage and discussing its basic meaning, I'll make a few comments about the topic. This section might appeal to you if you're interested in the philosophical, historical, or cultural context behind it. Following that, I'll talk a bit about the language. At the beginning of this episode, I mentioned 子曰, and this is possibly the one thing that anyone who's ever heard of Confucius knows. 子曰 means the master said. It's sometimes translated as Confucius said. That's because this character 子 refers to Kongzi, or Master Kong, the most common name for Confucius in Chinese. There are other masters you might have heard of, the Taoist master Lao Tzu, the martial strategy master Sun Tzu, and so on. But in the context of the Analects, the master always refers to Confucius. When other masters are mentioned, they're not the single character Zi. Now let's talk about this term Junzi. This is often translated as exemplary person. Sometimes it's rendered as prince, gentleman, or even left in the modern Mandarin pronunciation as Junzi. You'll see them all. Maybe I'm the first one to use good dude, and I'm just patting myself on the back for that one right now. The historical context for this one is absolutely fascinating to me. It's something that drew me into a deeper exploration of the Analects. At the time of Confucius, spring and autumn period China in the 6th century BCE, Jun referred to a lord or political leader. This era, also known as the Eastern Zhou-dynasty, was a period of political fragmentation, with many effectively independent territories ruled by dukes and cliques of politically powerful families. Suffice to say, a Jun referred to a ruling class noble, and the Junzi originally referred to such a noble's son, i.e., a prince. What I find so fascinating is how the term for a noble's son was transformed completely by the passages collected in the Analects into this ideal exemplary person. The Analects does this switcheroo with a number of terms, and there's even a name for this, zhengming, or rectification of names. The way I think about it is like this. Imagine we live in a world where celebrities are poorly behaved. Well, okay, nobody needs to use their imagination for that. But anyway, say you wanted to do something about this. Your strategy for doing so, change the definition of the word celebrity. For you, instead of just meaning someone with a face and name widely recognized by the public, it's going to mean a figure widely recognized for their broad-reaching and positive contributions to society. In your opinion, anyone who meets the first definition but not the second should take a look in the mirror while considering the responsibility that comes along with their fortunate position in life. Now, you can have this opinion, but obviously that doesn't mean others are going to share it. But as it turns out, you have a weapon of awesome power in your arsenal, a large and vocal base of social media followers. So you start publishing your opinions. The celebrity takes care of their parents, you write. The celebrity says what they mean and means what they say. And slowly but surely, through all those likes, comments, and retweets, your ideas start to gain traction. Previously poorly behaved celebrities hear about your work too. They start to think about what they should be, and some start to think twice before going off on their next wacko Twitter rant. Eventually, celebrities even start contacting you, asking how they can do better. Well, there's plenty of this rectification of names topic to do a whole mini-series on itself, but we're going to leave it at that for now. So just keep in mind that the original and historical meaning of this term, junzi, is a noble's son, but that the Analects use it in a corrective fashion to mean an exemplary person, someone who thinks and acts in a principled fashion appropriate to their privileged position in life. Last up in this section, we'll talk about the word qi. Professor Ni's translation renders this as vessel, and my silly interpretation turns it into tool. These are both circling around a common meaning, but what's it really all about? The meaning of qi in Confucius's time was a ritual vessel or a sacrificial vessel. Now, I wouldn't blame you if you're still completely at a loss. It's not like most people these days have anything they refer to as a ritual vessel sitting around their house. But if you've got a set of champagne glasses, I'd argue you do. Maybe you're one of those lucky few who drink everything out of a champagne flute, and far be it from me to judge if that's your life. But the average person only breaks out those glasses on special occasions. Birthdays, New Year's Eve, celebrations, and so forth. And you're not just filling them with anything. Only bubbly goes in. So there you have it, a ritual vessel, possibly in your very own cupboard. You use it on special occasions like holidays. You conduct specific activities with it, like toasting, and you know exactly what you're supposed to fill it with. Ritual vessels were incredibly important in Zhou-dynasty China, and there were all sorts of them. Rituals themselves were even more important. The lives of Confucius and his disciples were at the epicenter of these rituals. Their occupation, referred to as the rujia, was focused on teaching and conducting rituals, including music, dance, and ceremonies performed to observe holidays, weddings, funerals, and even royal ascensions. The point is, they were extremely opinionated about ritual vessels. If you read Analect 6.25, Confucius's lament that people seem to be unable to call a spade a spade. What he's talking about actually is not spades here. He's complaining that a ritual vessel called a gu can no longer be recognized as a gu. Anyway, back to the main point about qi, ritual vessels. Traditional commentaries on this passage encourage readers to be broadly learned in culture instead of narrowly focused on a single aspect of life. In passage 5.4, Confucius criticizes his disciple Zhou, a talented businessman and diplomat, by calling him a sacrificial vessel. He's pointing out that despite Zhou's many talents, he still has too narrowly focused of an understanding of the world. What could Zhou learn that he hasn't already? Well, today we'd refer to many of these things as arts, humanities, liberal arts, or even social sciences. Confucius would encourage such people to study poetry and music, the classic literature of his time, and historical records that can guide them to promoting harmonious relationships and a flourishing society. Today, a few millennia later, that might be a bit more easily said than done. Considering how many years of highly concentrated study it takes to become a doctor, lawyer, engineer, or professor, how can anyone not be a bit of a tool? Of course, nobody avoids the humanities altogether, regardless of whether you have gotten a higher education. Even high school courses assign students to read the great works of literature, compose essays, and learn how to think about the world. But the fact is that today, more than ever, people are likely to be highly specialized in one area at the expense of others, and that this is practically a prerequisite for any type of career. So here's my take on what we need to keep in mind, considering the fact that, well, sorry to say it, but we're all kind of tools now. I'm going to hop back to the champagne glasses that we talked about earlier. Say that you were a champagne glass and you had even a modicum of self-respect. Would you let someone fill you with Coke, or red wine, or coffee? Well, of course not. And I think the same holds true if you want to be an exemplary person. If you're an educated, able-bodied person, then you should be opinionated about how people use your capabilities. If you're a talented salesperson, you could choose to work for a company selling tasers or a company selling books. Which one improves the lives of more people? Well, the question is yours to answer, but I think most people would agree that all other things being equal, it's better to engage in activities that help than those that harm. let's wrap up this section. We learned why many passages in the Analects begin with 子曰, or the master said, and that the master being referred to is Confucius himself. We discussed the original meaning of the term 君子, a noble son or prince, and that Confucius took it upon himself to 正名, or rectify this term to refer to an exemplary person, and that I've further modernized that to good dudes. Finally, we discussed qi, or ritual vessels, and the fact that Confucius and his 儒家 peers were highly opinionated about what constitutes the appropriate use of such vessels. Taken on the whole, this phrase 君子不器 means that it's important to learn broadly and deeply reflect on life, rather than building expertise in one area at the expense of all others. And I'd argue, since we're all a bit specialized today, it's critical you have that breadth of learning no matter where your expertise lies, so that you can put it to use for good and not just whatever others want to use it for. Next, I'm going to discuss some of the linguistic and literary notes on this passage. You might find this section interesting if you study Chinese language and translation, or if you're interested in the structure and interpretations of the Analects. I'll do my best every time to pull out some points from the passage that'll be useful to language learners, whether you're just getting started, been studying a while, or trying to work on your understanding of classical Chinese. Earlier in the episode, I mentioned this 子 character, and how in the context of the Analects, it always refers to the master, or Confucius. Well, if you're just starting Chinese, that might confuse you a bit. You probably already learned words like 儿子, son, 孩子, child, and 鞋子, shoes. Those are a couple of usages of the character 子. For the first two, son and child, it's used to refer to offspring. And in the second case, shoes, it's a type of grammatical marker, indicating the word is a noun. In this case, it's also indicating a noun, but here it's used to refer to a proper noun. And even more importantly, it's an honorific, a title bestowed upon people of great accomplishment. That's where we get this master from when you read translations like 子曰 as the master said, or 孔子 as Master Kong. Next up is qi, the one I mentioned earlier meaning a ritual vessel. It's not a coincidence that my wacky take on this phrase translates qi as tool, but that's a purely modern interpretation. If you're an intermediate learner of Chinese, you probably already encountered this character here and there. Ji qi means machine. Yue qi is a musical instrument, and every intermediate Chinese learner's favorite phrase, at least when I was studying, was 打规模, 杀伤武器. It means a weapon of mass destruction. Sure enough, these are all tools of one kind or another. It's just interesting to me to see how far this character has come in the 25 centuries that it's been since the Analects were written, and to note that way back then, sure, a ritual vessel probably did seem a whole lot more like a tool to folks than it does to us today. My last note on language is about a grammatical structure that's important to master if you're learning modern Chinese, and just as important if you're learning the classical language. And that's the topic-comment pattern. Topic-comment is exactly what it sounds like. The speaker states the topic of the sentence, then makes a comment on it. An example in English that just popped into my head is Pokemon. Gotta catch 'em all. Pokemon's the topic, and the comment about Pokemon is what you've got to do. That is, catch 'em all. In 2.12, we're dealing with the same thing on a highly simplified scale. Exemplary persons. They're not just vessels. It gets a whole lot more complicated than this, but having a good grasp on this type of phrasing when reading the Analects in the original Chinese is going to do you a world of good. I'll leave you with a few very brief literary notes on this passage, and then we'll wrap things up. There aren't particularly varied interpretations of 2.12. Sure, it's a metaphor, but whether you read the 19th century translation by James Legge, Professor Nie's translation that I quoted here, Ames and Rosemont, or many of the Chinese scholarly interpretations throughout the centuries, there's little confusion about the meaning of this metaphor. It's important to learn a broad range of subjects and avoid becoming specialized in a single area to the point that it's a detriment to others. When we look at the surrounding quotes, just like this one, they're concerned with the essential qualities of a junzi. These include emphasis on action, avoiding empty words, and being inclusive instead of exclusive. We'll get to all of these in due time, but for now, I'll stick to the ordering that I mentioned at the top of this episode, working through the shortest passages first. Again, this is your host, Elliott Bernstein. I hope you enjoyed this first episode of Exploring the Analects. Next, we'll read 15.39, Confucius's 4-syllable commentary on what it means to be a great teacher. See you there.